Oh,
Good morning,
hi,
Mr.
John.
Palmer. How are you, sir?
Doing good, man. How about you?
All right. I can't complain. I think spring is finally here in the Northeast. Apparently, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Kind of actually feels like it's
Uh,
skipping from spring to summer, but to be honest, it's supposed to be like 85 today.
we had 80s last week, and then we went from was it we went from winter to false summer, and then it rained all weekend, like starting Friday night, all the way through the weekend, all the way through. It just rained constantly. So um, yeah. So I think that was our spring because now I have to go mow my lawn.
Yeah, no, tis the season. Tis the season. Ah, so apparently we've
So what's
become
up, man?
a weather and landscaping podcast.
You know, no comment. I could 100% totally go off the rails on that one, but I'm gonna spare everyone, and we'll actually keep to IT and Wi-Fi and stuff that we might actually know what we're talking about.
Hmm, not going to touch that one.
'Cause-
Anyways.
Well, well, I'll tell you, I know more. I I know. No, I won't say that because I was going to say I know more about IT than I do landscaping. But I will tell you what: you give me a live plant, I will kill that thing in like 10 days flat.
I don't think that
So
qualifies as landscaping knowledge. I think that just qualifies as like not a green thumb.
well, but I'm more efficient at it than anybody. So I mean, I tell you, I will screw
Uh,
up some landscaping in
I
like special ways.
but you said 10 days. I mean, if you're really efficient at it, you just take the scissors and go snip. And for all
Well,
those, I
that's
don't know if
what
there's
you
like
do.
a PETA equivalent for plants, but we're not advocating plant violence here, please. No, save your nasty emails. We're not advocating for that at all. We love our plants and trees and
All right, so let me put a caveat into this.
always.
I'm trying to keep my plants alive, and yet I will still kill them in 10 days. So
That's a talent.
that I'm telling you, I have a talent.
Oh,
So what about IT, man? What's up with IT?
what is up with IT? It's a good question. So, I mean, we might as well just jump into it, right? We're 3 minutes in.
Yeah.
We're off the sort of off the rails. We got off the landscaping, the railroad ties or whatever. But anyways, um, so we had an interesting email this morning from a. We won't name him. We're not going to name and shame.
Yeah.
Not any shame, but had a inquiry from a industry friend of ours,
Yeah.
and it was about Beamflex. And we've had this one come up a few times. I believe you told an interesting story a couple years back, maybe even on the podcast at one point. And we've relayed that message in a couple RCWAs that I've been fortunate enough to teach. And it's a question of what is Beamflex, and the challenge we always run into, at least on our end, because we're on in the in the circle of trust, if you will. It's the secret sauce, right? It's really hard to explain vendor proprietary custom goodies, for lack of a better way to explain it. So since I've completely butchered it, what is Beamflex, Mr. Palmer?
So I'm going to admit that what I know about Beamflex, I actually got from Wireless Field Day. Well, most of what I got from Wireless Field Day. So way back in the day, before they called it Mobility Field Day, there was Wireless Field Day, and one of the Ruckus founders and resident genius guy um, did a presentation at Wireless Field Day and talked about Beamflex and what it is and how number one, Beamflex is not beam forming. They are two totally different things. Um, and most people sort of get this idea that it's the same. It's like, well, Ruckus had Beamflex, but then everybody else came out with beam forming. And so, now it's all the same. So there's no advantages. That can't be further from the truth. That's not how this works. That's not how it is. But I will quote Victor when I give you the answer, which is actually kind of simple. Um, Beamflex is the idea that we're going to focus all of the energy um, towards the client. Because if I'm talking to you or I'm talking to everybody here on the podcast, the most effective way for me to convey information is to look you in the eye and speak to you, face to face. It is not turning around and talking like this to my wall. That's not very effective, right? Now, it's effective for our demonstration,
Sure.
but it's not effective when it comes to the world of radio. So what Beamflex does is Beamflex sends the energy um, towards the client device. Now, in what is and Victor said this, and I think it's okay for me to say it. That the idea though isn't that we send the energy to the client because that's hard. Let's be honest, that's hard. What we do is we figure out where you're not. So we know, instead of trying to figure out that, hey, the client's right over there, what we do is we figure out, hey, we're pretty certain that the client is not over there. It's not back there. So we're going to send the energy this direction. Sort of like, hey, boo, push the energy this way. So if you can take at least half of your energy and send it towards where you think the client is, as opposed to where the client's not, then all of a sudden now that's better. Now, as over time we can dial that in and everything else like that. And Victor does a really good job on that video of talking about it. But that's what Beamflex is. Beamflex is the idea that it's a waste to send energy, you know, to where the clients, that you're talking to isn't. And the AP makes this adjustment on a per client basis. So it's constantly shifting and changing. And this only applies though to unicast packets. Anything, so if I'm talking to you, I'm going to send it this way. But if I'm talking to everybody that's in my house, well, I need, I got to talk to everybody. So I need that 360 pattern type of thing. And so, and this is where people get confused, is because they don't realize that Beamflex is only for unicast packets. It's only for, me talking to you or me talking to, you know, my microphone, because I'm wanting to send that information to one specific place, one specific person, thing that I wanted to pick up. Um, However, as most people know, that's not. I mean, Wi-Fi has that, but it also has a lot of other traffic, and so that's where the confusion comes in, really. But it's pretty simple to explain. Beamflex, which is instead of sending instead of taking the RF energy and sending it everywhere, we take the RF energy and we eliminate where we're pretty sure you're not, where the client device isn't at, and then we just send the rest, and we take that energy and we send it in that direction, and then we're done.
So the $1 million question, and I know this, I'm teeing up the softball. I need to have certain drivers, right? Only certain clients can support Beamflex, correct?
Man, you've been in sales too long, dude. Um,
No, I've been asked that question more than a few times, and or not even full disclosure. Yes, that was a bait question. I know the answer to that. So anybody that's a Ruckus person, please don't slaughter me. I know the answer. I'm going to let Jim answer it though. But I've been asked that, not even asked. I've been told that by people, and I think you had this one with the gentleman with the ranch. They were very, very adamant. They were on 1,000% certain. It was a hill they were willing to die on. That Beamflex is dependent on drivers. It's client specific. It's not, vendor agnostic, if you will. I mean, you have to use Ruckus, but it's so. What's the deal? Anybody can use this?
it's funny because it's a softball teed up type of question because you know what the answer is, but it also facilitates and is a leading question. It gets us into the rest of the discussion because what people get the answer to that question goes back to the question we just answered, which was Beamflex is not beamforming. Now, in order to support beamforming, the client device does have to support it. The client has to have the right drivers. The client has to participate in beamforming. So the question that you just asked is a, you know, is a follow-on add-on question, to, well, if Beamflex is the same as beamforming, which we've already broken, then we then need to have client drivers to support Beamflex, because Beamflex is the same as beamforming, except now that when we break that and we say, hey, it's two totally different things, now we know that that follow-up question doesn't apply anymore, because we're not, because it's not something that is in the standard, right? Um, and quite honestly, the clients don't even know this is happening, which is the leading question. That's that leading fact that gets us into the rest of this conversation, is the fact that clients have no clue. Clients don't know this is happening, and it's like that on purpose, which is good, because we then any client just knows that, hey, it works. And it's also bad because it's unique and fancy. When people ask me this question and I say, hey, does a client know if you put up a directional antenna? If you take a directional antenna and you plug it into an AP, like I used to do in my own job, and you focus that energy one direction, does the client know that? Does the client know that it's getting something special? Does it know that, oh, this is an external antenna AP I'm talking to, and not a, semi-hemispherical? Do they know that?
Shouldn't.
Have you ever heard anybody say that you have to have special client drivers to work on a directional antenna?
I've heard a lot of special things, and you know where I was going from last week, but no, I've never heard of anything. I mean, the client has to be as clueless as possible. The client drives everything. We've covered that. There's
Right.
episodes for that. But no, I mean, it would be Wi-Fi would be. I don't even want to say it would be unusable, but if you had to specify what kind of an antenna you were or were not talking to, people would give
It,
up.
yeah, because it's untenable. It's with the number of client devices that are available in the world today, it wouldn't be able to work. So so that's the same answer you have for Beamplex. Client doesn't know. Client doesn't care, right? Which then leads us into the next question, right? Because we say that it's a, because I just compared it to a directional antenna. And this is where, the questions really start to come up. And then we'll lead this into the next question after that. But if we take a look at, say, a data sheet, and this is not my favorite AP, but this is an AP that is, because everybody knows my favorite is the R650. But this is close enough. This actually happens to be the same AP that I used for one of my WLPC presentations. But let's come down here to the patterns, right? Because we were just talking about directional antennas, and what you'll see is, we have these, and I think I said this in my presentation. When you have a 4x4 AP, which this one is, you basically have four radios. Well, each pattern is going to be a little different for each one of those. So what you have is you have this sort of like, hey, this elements 2 and 3 cover this area, but element 1 doesn't, type of thing, right? And so what you end up with is what you see in these slicks and these data sheets is really a composite pattern of the four elements. And if you try to break those things out, it looks really bad and it doesn't work, because depending as the client moves, you're going to end up switching. Lots of other crazy stuff goes in there. We don't want to cover that. But what the question then comes down to is you have our client device, which is right here, and it's this little phone guy that they in this composite pattern, which is what we see in this top section. This, it's like, hey, here's my AP. Here's a composite, and then we have the Beamflex Plus, which ends up, you can see, makes it a little kind of crazy. But when they break it out down here, and we're taking a look at the azimuth patterns down here, the azimuth, when we take a look at this pattern, it's basically a 360, and we're talking about the horizontal coverage here, right? So that's a 360. However, when we take a look at the vertical, right? And man, if you watch that WLPC presentation, it drives me nuts, because it has the AP sitting on a table. We never do and so I would rotate this.
It'll work though.
Oh no, it'll work, and I've done it. You just have to get the table lower, and then understand that the fact that when you take a look at this back lobe, the back lobe is really pulled in tight, and I talk about why that is in my presentation. So yeah, go watch that one from a year and a half ago. But anyway, here's the thing is you see this composite pattern in the orange, and then you see this black one, which is the Beamflex. And this is the idea that, hey, we're actually going to take the RF and we're going to focus it down to where that client is. We're going to say, hey, we're pretty sure this client's over in this direction. And in this particular AP, I want to say there's like 4,000 different patterns between the azimuth, the horizontal and the vertical type of focusing, where we're going to take that and dynamically shift it and make it a patch antenna for that one particular client, for that one particular stream of data on that conversation. It's going to be, sort of a patch antenna pointed at him. And then when we get ready to talk to the next client, it's going to shift and it's going to talk over there, and then it'll talk over there, and then it'll all dynamically shift. But the orange one is the one we really want to pay attention to, because, this is all fine and good, but unless you're like me or you've been doing this such a long time, this is a little hard to read. And so what ends up happening is people go, well, how does this look like in a planning tool? Well, actually, no, you know what? Let's shift back. I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. Now, this happens to, and I showed this off in my presentation. So this is what this chart actually looks like. And I think if I want to get fancy, I'll do what I did in my presentation. Can I rotate? No, I can't rotate that. Yeah. I was hoping it's not a picture, so I can't rotate it. But anyway, so this is what that pattern actually looks like. And you see it's a little more, it's not as nice and smooth as the slick right here, because this is really kind of dummied down to show, because it's so small, getting that detail is really hard. So they just kind of go, hey, you know what? If we look here on this 2.4 elevation, there's a null right here where we don't really see that on the 5 gigahertz. If you switch back over, you can kind of see that, hey, there's this little null here on the 5 gigahertz, but when we compare it to the 2.4, there's a really big null. And I've said this more than once, but this is what makes me laugh when people are like, I was standing right underneath the AP. And I'm like, that's the worst spot. Don't stand directly underneath the AP. Stand off to the side. Gives you a little more distance, lets that RF breathe. But yeah, so that's why you don't. But this is what the patterns actually look like. And if you've ever wondered, these are the numbers down here on the left-hand side. And there's actually 360 numbers in this list. And that's how they end up with the patterns. And if you've taken my antenna deep dive class, you realize I've told the story in the past couple of years about how I asked an antenna design company. I said, hey, give me a chart like this, but without the blue line. And it turns out they can't do that, because all this other stuff is actually, all these other lines and the numbers and everything is all based on having these numbers over here on the left-hand side. And if you don't give it a number, it can't build the chart. So fun story. But anyway, this is what the patterns look like. We can take a look at the azimuth. This one's a little more funky. Now I get that, but more importantly, what we're seeing here is we're not seeing Beamflex, right? None of these things, none of these patterns, and we'll focus on this one because it's a much easier pattern to kind of get an idea. The AP sits here. This is the front of the AP, so we would normally rotate this upside down, hang it from the ceiling, down like that. But if we take this guy and we compare it to this pattern over here on the right-hand side, what is shown is the orange. This is the orange line. This black line doesn't show up. None of these black lines right here in this row show up in the charts that we get from the chambers. So to get these charts, you put them in a chamber and you do a bunch of constant measurements, and and they get the numbers, and then they put them in the chart, and this is where the plots come from. But anyway, what you'll notice is none of these have the black lines. Well, because we don't want that. Think about that for a second. We don't want the black lines. But why not?
I was going to say, why not?
Well, no, I'm asking you. Why not?
You're the antenna guru.
But this isn't an antenna question. This leads lends into the last part of my argument here, or last part of my rant, explanation, whatever you want to
Well, the
call it.
black line is the client, right? So
Well, but this black line shows Beamflex, right? So what we're saying is we're taking that energy and we're sort of focusing it this direction. When you look at it from the horizontal perspective, it's not as focused, right? It's more of, but what you'll notice is there's still 10 dB, 10 to 15 dB of signal that's not sent that direction, that is sent on the composite pattern. But why is that?
why indeed?
Okay, so here's the answer, and this is going to be my last point, and then and hopefully everybody, as I've walked through this, this is where it all starts to come together. I have a planning tool here. Um, it's the one I have access to, so it's the one I use when I need to show stuff like this off.
Which is
So
what
what I
Jim
want to do is
what Jim is saying here is if anybody else has a planning tool they want to show off, Jim needs a license.
yeah, Jim is not as blessed in the tool department as many people think.
No, I'm not touching that. Anyways, let's show them what this
So
looks like.
so I'm going to add an access point into my. This is this is the only floor plan I built because I don't have floor plans either. It's amazing what I don't
I
get.
sent you floor plans.
Yeah, I lost them. But anyway.
Well, you can't say. No, I'm not.
Yeah. Let's take my AP, right? We're going to drop it in here. Now, what is this AP showing?
It's coverage. But radiation, I
Coverage
should
of
say.
what?
Well, where it expects the AP coverage to go based on the floor plan, what the walls are and everything
Right.
it knows. And
Now, now this is a cool feature, and this actually really helps me. Now, let's say, and you know what? It's hard to see, but let me, I'm going to turn this off for a second. There are two doors, and oddly enough, we only use the back doors for this building, mainly because there's no parking in the front. It faces the street, so we have to go in the back doors. So there's a back door here and a back door here, down here in the bottom, and that's what we use when we go into the building. So if I have my AP up here in the front, and I come in this back left door down here, right? So let's switch back over here. We'll zoom out a little bit so we can kind of see. Here's my back door down here. Now, if I take my client, let's see, on the client view, and I put my client right here like I'm walking into the building, what's the first thing my client looks for?
so, well, I was going to come up with a smart answer there. I mean, they want to get coverage. They want to connect to an AP.
But what's the type of frame that they are looking at?
Door frame? You set me up for that one. It's a Monday. You set me up, man. Come on.
What's the type of frame or packet, data or IP packet, wireless frame? What's the type that it's looking at? Very first,
You're listening for the beacons.
listening for the beacons. What are beacons? Beacons, are they unicast or are they broadcast?
They're broadcast.
So if it's a broadcast, one to many, what am I going to use?
What do you mean? You're gonna just you're not using Beamflex at that point.
I'm not using Beamflex. I'm using an Omni pattern. So that's what the tools show, is the pattern. And so as we roam through here, because I only have one AP, it's like, but as I'm roaming through here, it's using the pattern based on the beacons because that's what we're planning for. Now, if I were to add in a second AP, right? We'll add a second AP and we'll put it over here. I will drop it down into here because this is a really bad area, right? So we put it here, right? So now when we come back to the client view, oh, look at that. It's now connected to there. But the coverage that I'm showing is only the beacon. It's not Beamflex. Now, as it comes through here, then it's like, and then it gets to this point, what is the client device? Now we're on this sort of this edge of where we think it's going to be, right? What
Sure.
do we think? I mean, what does the client look for? One of the things it's looking for is beacons. It's scanning other channels. It's looking for other things. If it has 11K and RNR and all this other stuff, then it knows, hey, I'm going to check this channel for, what I've been told this AP is operating at. But as I get up here and I roam, one of the things I look for is the beacon, which is an Omni. So when people have asked me this more than one time, what are these tools looking at? Are they looking, are they using Beamflex? And the answer is no, they're not. And it goes back to when you take a look at the data sheet, we come back down here to the data sheet, and somewhere in this data sheet, it'll say physical characteristics. Um, I got to find where that particular block is. Um, right here, antenna type. Adaptive antenna that provides 4,000 plus unique antenna patterns per band. So we're asking, when we switch back over here to our tool, right? We're asking these tools to predict, we give it one pattern, the beacons, right? Because that's what we want to plan for. We want to see, hey, how do these beacons work? How they do all this other stuff? Where's the overlap? Where's my primary coverage? Where's my secondary coverage? And this is all based on the beacons, which, if you remember from this particular pattern, we only have one pattern. We don't have 4,000 patterns because that's the secret sauce. The secret sauce is not, you know, the secret sauce is the 4,000 patterns, and it states in it in our data sheet. So when we take a look at this stuff, and I answered this in another document that I wrote up for some people, was, we're asking these planning tools to do a whole lot, but if we try to ask these planning tools to predict, hey, which one of the 4,000 potential patterns is going to be used for this client at any point in time as he's roaming. And oh, by the way, we have 4,000 patterns coming off of this guy. And if I were to take another AP and we were to put them down into this area, we'll take this one, we'll drag him up here, like that, right? Now we're looking a little bit better. And to quote Peter McKenzie, we want some yellows in there because that helps our clients roam. It's not all about making the whole thing green. It's about making it acceptable. But anyway, now when we put that in there, now we're asking the planning tool to predict 4,000 patterns per AP per band times 3 AP. It now needs to do 12,000 patterns. So we're not asking the planning tools to do that. And so what you see when you do a planning is you don't see Beamflex. Now, how this translates into how it works in real life is the idea that you're going to get better performance once it goes live than you will see in a predictive model like we're looking at here. But the short answer is Beamflex is not beamforming as such, because it's more like a directional antenna than anything else. Then the clients don't know about it and don't care about it.
They just benefit from it.
They get to benefit from it, but we're not asking the planning tools to predict that because of the number of patterns that are potentially going to be in play. And when you make this bigger, right, you go much bigger building, then now all of a sudden it's even more complicated. And then it's like, oh, then you have to go, did they pick the right pattern? Did they pick the same pattern that our AP is going to pick? And, the chances of it, it's 1 in 4,000. And, it's like, hey, what are those odds? 4,000 plus. And then so it just expands upon the problem. But what is shown in the planning tools is the beacon, because that's what the clients listen to. That's one of the key things that they key on making the decision to join, which AP they're going to join. They're going to join, the one. So now that I have an AP down here and I take my client and as they come in this back door, then it's like, which one are they going to connect to? Instead of connecting the one up here, on the left, they connected to this new one I dropped in here on the right. But as they roam, and so they use those beacons, which are sent omnidirectional or semi-hemispherical. They're sent in the one-to-many broadcast, which does not use Beamflex. So if you've ever wondered, that's what it is. And that's why the planning tools, and I've talked to the guys who came up with this little client roaming thing, and um, after many conversations with them for a long time, we decided that this is good enough, and we're not going to worry about it. And quite honestly, I can tell you based on real world tests, this planning tool with junk data put in, which we talked about on the garbage in, garbage out on our top 10 things. This planning tool is actually, it's not perfect. It's not exactly what I found in real life, but it's pretty close. And if you watch my video from WLPC, close is all I'm looking for. So
Well,
there it is, John.
it's in closest. It's predictive, right? I mean, let's boil down the purpose of a predictive design model. It's not a design. It's to get a good idea of what you're going to get without necessarily having to send somebody on site.
Yeah.
So, and you're
And it's
trying. I
again,
mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to save money, or you're trying to get some information before you can go on site. And I think after the pandemic and the travel cuts that we've seen, a lot of people are relying a lot more on the predictives. But the reality is, there's no substitute for getting on site. Now, you're not going to get the benefit. You're not going to see the benefit of Beamflex represented in a predictive model.
nope.
But we're not the only ones, right? That, I mean, I'm not going to shill for another company on a corporate podcast, but you know, it underscores to me the importance of doing an actual live survey because you know the AP behaves differently in the real world. The real world behaves differently than the software will tell it to, because you don't know if they got the materials right. But so this begs the last question. I'm going to set it up, and if it's really really bad, we'll just cut this. Um, but does this mean that like I have to like do I have to survey differently because I've got Beamflex in my office now?
It depends. Like you set it up, I had to go there.
I know, I know, I know.
So it really depends. And part of it has to do with which type of survey you normally do. If you do a passive survey, when you walk around with a little device, you're holding something in your hands, whether it's your phone, whether it's your tablet, whether it's a laptop on a little survey desk, and you have a radio, whether it's a USB, you got like 18 USB radios, sitting across the top of your laptop screen, you know, and in some type of 3D printed um, bracket that holds all these things, or you have them,
Busting out the
velcroed to
Wi-Fi
the
cracking.
or like roll the Wi-Fi Kraken, or you have a dedicated survey device that you got from one of these software company, the planning tools. When you walk around with that and you do a passive survey, you're just listening for beacons. So that's why the planning tool only shows beacons, is because when you do a passive survey,
So
when you're just listening, then what you get is the beacons. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that what is being represented in your predictive design matches what you see in a post installation validation survey. And so it's only listening for the beacons. Now, so that then changes if you say, hey, I want to do an active survey where I'm going to take my device and I'm going to start pinging a, a something else on the network, because that's now an active survey. But what's going to happen with an active survey is the Beamflex is going to start sending data, and it's now going to now on an active survey, it's listening, for other things. There's other, now you've now engaged the network. And so Beamflex can skew an active survey, whereas with a passive survey, it won't. And so that's where it depends come in, is because in one you're triggering Beamflex, and in the other one you're not. So if you want to make sure that you're valid, if you're actually doing a validation of, hey, what I predicted is what I've actually seen, then do a passive survey at the end. If you want to then see how Beamflex comes into play, do an active survey after that, and then diff those two surveys of walking around the building, which people don't want to pay for you to walk once, let alone twice. But what you'll see is that additional 2 to 3 dB of signal gain. But that's where it is, and that's what it is, and that's why it's hard to model Beamflex, is because there's so many patterns, and the client devices are still listening to the beacon frames. So
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's one of those where I don't think there is, like you said, there's. I mean, and I know you've been working with them longer than most, but there's really no way to, I think, represent both in a predictive, just because at the end of the day, you can't kick on Beamflex until you know you've got a beacon that can be heard by your client. Simple as
yes,
that. So you always have to be able to hear the beacons, which it's just an extra step. But I think at the end of the day, it's and I don't want to. I mean, I don't have my hat with me, but I don't want to make it sound like I'm a homer. But honestly, if you have a good predictive model and you do a good passive survey with a ruckus deployment in mind, odds are good. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee because I'm never going to do that, but odds are good that your active survey and your client experience is probably going to be better than what your survey and your model indicate it should be. Which, to be honest, as a Wi-Fi engineer, even if I wasn't working for Ruckus, is probably something that I'd like. If you told me every day and twice on Sunday that I did a model, it looked great. I did a survey, it looked great, and the actual experience is going to be even better than that, I would take that all the time, 100% without a doubt. That's the kind of, that's all we can ask for, right? I mean, at a minimum, you want it to behave as good as you survey. And if you're telling me here that the probability of it being better than what was surveyed just because of what Beamflex can do, um, sign me up, take my money.
and but here's the thing, right? It's always a double-edged sword, and there's always going to be corner cases, the exception that proves the rule, you know. And so, that those exceptions that we find actually will prove that, hey, for the 99% of the other time, it's actually working. So that's where the exception will prove our rule, is when you find that those very documented exceptions cases and those corner cases, it says, hey, as long as you're not X, Y, and Z, then this rule applies. So you will find an exception that will prove the rule. And one of the things that I've found, and this is just from playing around in this, in the map that we were showing earlier, is that a lot of times, and I've heard this from the field too, sometimes you have to turn the radios down a little bit because the actual performance is better. But I would much rather turn the radios down by 1 or 2 dB over what I predicted in my design. I'd much rather turn those down a little bit because it's if you design at full power and then you have to go higher than that because there's a wall that has more attenuation than you realize, then that becomes a bigger problem. We don't have to turn. I haven't heard of many people, when they do the design process correctly, having to turn APs off. What I have heard is they've had to go in and they've had to bump the power down just a dB or two, just enough to kind of make it because it does perform better than you would think. So
That makes sense.
again, I mean, if we're going to get into the point where we have to complain about better performance, then do we really want to go there, that argument? So
Well, arguments are fun though, and they're good for content. But so on that note, I think I don't want to say we've beaten up Beamflex, but I think it's a topic that comes up all the time, and it's always been hard to explain. I think that was a really good explanation, to be honest. You and I have talked about it before, not even on the podcast, and I think putting it out there, putting it on the channel, so to speak, so that it's a shareable, teachable event with a nice walkthrough, that helps a lot. I think so. Hopefully, this will be a good, a well received
well,
episode. But I have nothing else. So, any final thoughts, closing items, ideas, wisdom?
um, I would I would put this. I don't want to put it. I don't want to call it a challenge, but I want to sort of put this out to the audience. Um, if you've had a different experience with Beamflex, or if you've had, or you know, you have a question about what I just went through, send us an email. Either way, because you know, I haven't. I haven't surveyed every single Ruckus deployment there is. And so I don't have every data point. I don't have those exceptions. I don't have those corner cases. So please send us an email, ruckcast@comscope.com, and let us know what you think about everything we just covered. But the idea that um, we have, that this is how the planning tool works. That's the biggest thing I wanted to get out there is we plan and we design for the beacons, and then Beamflex is that additional thing that will help you, sort of get your network over the top. So send us an email. Let us know what you think. And hopefully this was instructional.
We try to sometimes. Well, all right, Mr. Palmer. I'll catch you on the next one.
All right, Mr. Deegan.
Be well. Hey there. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show and haven't yet done so, please like and subscribe. If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us at ruckcast@comscope.com. Jim and I both read those emails. To learn more about any Ruckus products or services that we've talked about on this or any other prior podcast, please check out our About section of the show or the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.